In the high-stakes world of Manhattan real estate, arrogance is a currency, but Alexander Sterling just spent his last dime. Picture the scene. A boardroom overlooking Central Park, a billion-dollar merger on the table, and a CEO so confident in his power that he brings his 23-year-old mistress to the signing, introducing her to the board as the future Mrs. Sterling. He thought his quiet, loyal wife of 20 years was sitting at home, oblivious and powerless. He was wrong. When the boardroom doors opened, it wasn't a lawyer walking in with divorce papers. It was the one person legally required to sign the check, and she wasn't there to save him. The humidity in Singapore is unforgiving, even in October. But inside the climate-controlled penthouse of the Marina Bay Sands, the air was crisp, scented with expensive leather and the faint metallic tang of anxiety. Alexander Sterling stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the gardens by the bay. At 48, Alexander was the poster child for American corporate vitality. He was the CEO of Sterling Vance Dynamics, a logistics and shipping conglomerate that moved everything from microchips to crude oil across the Pacific. He was handsome in a way that money buys, veneers, bespoke suits from Savile Row, and a personal trainer who woke him up at 4 a.m. every morning. Sitting on the velvet sofa behind him was Isabella Bella Ricci. She was 24, an Instagram model with 1.2 million followers and a startling lack of awareness regarding corporate etiquette. She was scrolling through her phone, her acrylic nails clicking rhythmically against the screen. "Alex, baby," she whined, snapping a piece of gum. "How much longer? You promised we'd go shopping at Orchard Road before dinner." Alexander turned, flashing that shark-like smile that had disarmed shareholders for 2 decades. "Patience, Bella. This meeting changes everything. Once Julian signs the Series B expansion papers, the company valuation hits $4 billion. I'll buy you the whole store." Bella giggled, holding up her left hand to admire the light hitting a canary-yellow diamond ring, a ring that was technically not yet an engagement ring, but certainly looked like one. "I just want people to know. I'm tired of hiding, Alex. When are you going to tell her?" Alexander's expression tightened. Her was Eleanor Sterling, his wife of 22 years. If Alexander was the face of the company, Eleanor was the ghost in the machine. They had met at Wharton Business School. Back then, Alexander was a scholarship kid with ambition and charm, and Eleanor Vance was the heiress to the Vance shipping empire. When her father died, Alexander took the reins, merging his aggressive strategies with her family's legacy. Over the years, Eleanor had faded into the background. She raised their 2 sons, chaired the charity galas, and seemingly spent her days gardening at their estate in Connecticut. Alexander had grown to view her as a relic, necessary furniture in the house of his life, but no longer the foundation. He assumed she was soft. He assumed she was oblivious to his affairs. "I told you, Bella," Alexander said, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "After this deal. The merger requires spousal consent on certain asset transfers, but my lawyers have drafted a workaround. Once the ink is dry today, I file the papers tomorrow. You are the future Mrs. Sterling. Start acting like it." The elevator chimed. The doors slid open to reveal Julian Hayes. Julian was British, old money, and the managing partner of Helios Capital. He was the man with the checkbook. Behind him trailed a phalanx of lawyers in grey suits. "Alexander," Julian said, his voice cool and clipped. He didn't offer a hand. "Julian, good to see you," Alexander boomed, walking over to clap the smaller man on the shoulder. He gestured grandly to the sofa. "I don't believe you've met Isabella. My partner." Alexander paused for effect, then winked. "And my future wife." The room went dead silent. The lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Julian Hayes stopped moving. He looked at Isabella, who offered a little wave without looking up from her phone, and then looked back at Alexander with an expression of pure bewilderment. "I see," Julian said slowly. "I was under the impression that Eleanor would be joining us." Alexander waved a dismissive hand. "Eleanor?" "God, no. She doesn't handle the heavy lifting, Julian. You know that. She's probably at a flower show in Greenwich. Besides, we don't need her for the preliminary signing. I have power of attorney." "Do you?" Julian asked. It wasn't a casual question. It was sharp, like a surgeon's scalpel. "Of course," Alexander laughed, though a bead of sweat pricked his hairline. "Look, Julian, the Vance Family Trust is a silent partner. I run the show. Bella here is just getting a preview of the empire she's going to help me rule." "Right, honey?" "Whatever," Bella murmured. "Just hurry up." Julian Hayes walked to the head of the mahogany table and set down his briefcase. He didn't sit. He looked at Alexander with a mixture of pity and distaste. "Alexander, there seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding regarding the structure of this investment," Julian said. "Helios Capital isn't investing in you. We are investing in the stability of the Vance legacy. The board explicitly requested that all primary shareholders be present." "I am the primary shareholder," Alexander snapped, his patience fraying. "I own 40% of the voting stock. Eleanor owns 40%, which I control by proxy, and the rest is public float. What is the problem?" "The problem," a new voice spoke from the hallway, "is that your proxy expired 3 days ago, Alexander." Alexander froze. The color drained from his face. The voice was quiet, melodic, and terrifyingly familiar. But it didn't sound like the woman who asked him if he wanted tea in the evenings. It sounded like steel. Eleanor Sterling walked into the room. She wasn't wearing the floral prints Alexander usually saw her in. She was wearing a tailored white suit that cost more than Bella's car, her grey-blonde hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She wore no jewelry, except for a simple gold band on her right hand. She didn't look at Alexander. She didn't look at the mistress. She walked straight to Julian Hayes, who bowed his head slightly in respect. "Eleanor," Julian said, relieved. "We were just discussing the future." "So I heard," Eleanor said, turning to face her husband. Her eyes were clear and dry. "Hello, Alexander. Who is this?" She gestured to Bella. Alexander stammered. The arrogance that had filled the room moments ago was leaking out like air from a punctured tire. "Ellie, what are you doing in Singapore? You thought I was in Connecticut," she finished for him. "Just like you thought you had the authority to dilute the family shares for this merger. And who is this young woman you just introduced as your future wife?" Bella, sensing the shift in power but not understanding the magnitude, stood up. "I'm Isabella. I'm his fiancée." "Well, almost." Eleanor looked at the girl. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She smiled. It was a terrifying, pitying smile. "Sit down, child," Eleanor said softly. "The adults are talking." The silence following Eleanor's command was absolute. Bella, usually quick to clap back at anyone who disrespected her, found herself sinking back into the velvet cushions, her mouth shut. There was an authority in Eleanor's voice that triggered a primal instinct to obey. Alexander, however, was trying to regain control of the narrative. He was a narcissist, and narcissists do not handle public humiliation well. He stepped between Eleanor and the table, puffing his chest out. "This is ridiculous," Alexander barked, his face flushing red. "Eleanor, go back to the hotel. We will discuss this later. You are embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" Eleanor asked, opening her own briefcase. She pulled out a thick stack of documents. "Julian, Are the terms of the Helios injection still dependent on the key man clause? Julian nodded solemnly. They are, Mrs. Sterling. However, given the introduction Alexander just made, the board has concerns about leadership stability. Alexander, Eleanor said, ignoring Julian for a moment and turning to her husband. Do you know why I'm here? To nag me? To ruin the biggest deal of my life? No, she said calmly. I'm here because you're broke. The words hung in the air. Broke? Alexander laughed nervously, looking at the lawyers. I'm worth $600 million on paper. On paper, Eleanor corrected. But you see, Alexander, I've been reading the quarterly reports, the real ones, not the sanitized versions you show the board. You leveraged your personal equity to fund that disastrous lithium mine project in Bolivia. You borrowed against your shares to buy the yacht in Monaco, the one you told me was a corporate expense, and you've been siphoning operational cash to fund consulting fees for Miss Ricci here. Bella's eyes widened. That's a lie, Alexander shouted. Julian, she's crazy. She's a jealous, vindictive housewife who doesn't understand high finance. I understand enough, Eleanor said, sliding a document across the table. I understand that the bank called the loan on the Bolivia project last week. You have 48 hours to cover a $100 million margin call, or you lose your 40% stake in the company. That's why we are here, isn't it? That's why you're rushing this deal with Helios. You're not expanding. You're trying to use their investment capital to plug your personal debts before the SEC finds out. Alexander looked like he had been punched in the gut. He looked at Julian. Julian wasn't looking at him. He was studying the ceiling tiles. You audited me, Alexander whispered. You audited your own husband? I audited the CEO of my father's company, Eleanor replied, and I found a thief. She walked over to the window, looking out at the same view Alexander had claimed as his own just 10 minutes ago. For 20 years, Alexander, I let you play the big man, she said, her back to him. I let you take credit for the Asian expansion, which was my idea. I let you take credit for the automated shipping lanes, which my father designed. I stayed home. I raised the boys. I looked the other way when you had your late nights at the office. She turned around. The sadness in her eyes was gone, replaced by cold resolve. I knew about the first mistress, Alexander. Sarah, the paralegal, 2008. Then there was the tennis instructor in 2014. I tolerated them because you were discreet, and you were still good for the company. But this? She gestured to Bella, introducing her as your future wife in front of our investors, while you're trying to use my family's money to bail yourself out. That is sloppy, and I don't tolerate sloppiness. Bella stood up again, her voice shaking. He loves me. He's going to divorce you, and we're going to take half. Eleanor laughed. It was a genuine, amused sound. Half? Eleanor looked at Julian. Julian, be a dear and explain the Vance family trust prenuptial agreement to Miss Ricci. Alexander seems to have forgotten to mention it. Julian cleared his throat. Certainly. Alexander signed a binding document 22 years ago. It stipulates that in the event of infidelity, proven by admission or public declaration, he forfeits all claim to the Vance assets. Furthermore, his personal shares in Sterling Vance Dynamics revert to the trust if he engages in actions that bring the company into disrepute. Julian paused, looking at Alexander. Introducing a mistress as a future spouse during a sensitive merger negotiation. Well, the legal team agrees. That fits the definition. Alexander was shaking. You can't do this. I am the company. The shareholders love me. The shareholders love profit, Alexander, Eleanor said. And you are a liability. She sat down in the chair Alexander had meant for himself. She picked up a fountain pen, a Mont Blanc that had belonged to her father. "So, here is how this is going to go," Eleanor said, uncapping the pen. "I am going to sign the investment papers with Helios Capital, but not as a silent partner. I am assuming the role of interim CEO, effective immediately." "You," Alexander spat. "You haven't worked a day in 20 years. "I've worked every day," she said icily. "Managing you." She looked at the paperwork. "This investment saves the company. It dilutes your shares down to a non-voting minority. And because you just admitted to this—" She waved a hand at Bella. "Relationship in front of witnesses, the morality clause in your contract kicks in. You're fired, Alexander, without severance." Alexander lunged for the papers. "I won't let you." Two of the large men in suits, who Alexander assumed were lawyers, stepped forward. They weren't lawyers, they were security. They blocked him easily. "Don't make a scene, Alex," Eleanor said, signing her name with a flourish. "Eleanor Vance Sterling." "It's unbecoming." She looked up at Bella, who was now crying, clutching her designer bag. "And you," Eleanor said, "Miss Ricci, I'd advise you to check the deed on that condo in Miami he promised you." "It's in my name," Bella sobbed. "Is it?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Or is it in the name of a shell company owned by Sterling Vance Dynamics? Because if it's the latter, and I know it is, company property is for employees only. You have until Monday to vacate." Alexander leaned against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He looked at the woman he had ignored, cheated on, and underestimated for 2 decades. He realized for the first time that he had never really known her at all. He had married a shark and treated her like a goldfish. "Why?" Alexander croaked. "Why wait until now?" Eleanor stood up, handing the signed documents to Julian. "Because, Alexander," she said, smoothing her skirt. "Revenge is a dish best served when the check is due." She turned to Julian. "Shall we get dinner, Julian? I believe there is a lovely spot on the roof. I'm famished." "It would be my honor, Madam CEO," Julian said. They walked out, leaving Alexander Sterling sitting on the floor of the penthouse he could no longer afford, with a mistress who was already Googling divorce lawyers, not realizing there was no marriage to dissolve. But the story didn't end there. Alexander Sterling was down, but he was a cornered animal, and Eleanor had just started a war that would drag them both through the mud of New York's elite, the tabloids of London, and the criminal courts of the Cayman Islands, because Alexander had a secret that wasn't about money, and if Eleanor took his company, he was going to release it. Alexander Sterling did not go quietly into the night. He went to the Four Seasons in Midtown Manhattan, booked the Ty Warner penthouse on a credit card that hadn't been frozen yet, and made a phone call. He didn't call a lawyer. He called Marcus Stone. Marcus Stone was a man who didn't have a job title on his business card, mostly because what he did wasn't entirely legal. In the circles of the ultra-wealthy, he was known as the janitor. If you killed a hooker, crashed a Ferrari while drunk, or, in Alexander's case, got publicly castrated by your wife in front of major investors, you called Marcus. Marcus arrived at the suite at 2 a.m. He was a small, kinetic man with shaved hair and glasses that cost more than a Honda Civic. He listened to Alexander's ranting for 20 minutes, sipping a sparkling water while Alexander paced the floor, throwing cushions. "She humiliated me, Marcus. She planned it. She's trying to steal my company," Alexander screamed, his face a mottled red. Bella was sitting in the corner, scrolling through TikTok, her eyes red from crying. She had already posted 3 vague, sad quotes on her Instagram story to garner sympathy. "Sit down, Alex," Marcus said, his voice surprisingly deep. "You're losing the plot. You're thinking like a businessman. You need to think like a victim." "I am a victim." "No," Marcus corrected. "Right now, you're an adulterer who got caught. That's a bad look. We need to change the narrative. We need to make Eleanor the villain." Alexander stopped pacing. "How? She has the moral high ground. I cheated." "Infidelity is boring, Alex. People forgive cheating if the wife is a monster," Marcus said, opening his laptop. "Tell me about Eleanor. Not the business stuff, the personal stuff. Is she depressed? Does she drink? Does she take pills?" Alexander hesitated. She sees a therapist for anxiety. Since her father died." Marcus's eyes lit up. "Perfect. Anxiety or instability? She takes Xanax sometimes to sleep. She's quiet, withdrawn." "Okay," Marcus typed furiously. "Here is the play. We don't deny the affair. We lean into it. You didn't cheat because you're a pig. You sought comfort because your marriage was a cold, abusive, emotional wasteland. You were trapped with a woman who is mentally unstable, vindictive, and possibly off her medication." Bella looked up. "Can I say that? You," Marcus pointed a finger at her, "are going to be the star. You're not the mistress. You're the soulmate who saved him from a toxic environment." The next morning, the offensive began. It started with a leak to the New York Post. The headline screamed, "Mad Queen. Is Sterling Vance CEO Eleanor Sterling mentally fit to lead?" The article, citing anonymous family friends, claimed that Eleanor had suffered a psychotic break following the death of her father and had been acting erratically for years. It suggested her sudden takeover wasn't a business move, but a manic episode designed to destroy her husband out of paranoia. Then came the video. Bella sat on a beige couch, wearing a modest sweater. No cleavage, minimal makeup. She looked directly into the camera lens of her iPhone. "Hi, guys," she whispered, wiping away a fake tear. "I usually don't address rumors. But I can't stay silent while the man I love is being destroyed. Alexander isn't perfect, but he's been living in a nightmare for 20 years. He was trapped in a marriage with a woman who controlled his every move, who threatened him. We were just trying to find happiness, and now she's using her family's money to crush us because she can't stand to see him happy." The video hit 3 million views in 4 hours. The comment section, initially hostile toward the home wrecker, began to shift. "OMG, she looks so sad. If the wife is crazy, that explains why he left. Secure the bag, Queen. Toxic wives are the worst." By noon, the stock price of Sterling Vance Dynamics wobbled. The market hates uncertainty, and a mentally unstable CEO is the definition of uncertainty. Eleanor was in the company's Manhattan headquarters when the news broke. She was sitting in Alexander's old office, now stripped of his golf trophies, reviewing the accounts with Julian Hayes. Julian looked up from his tablet, his face pale. "Eleanor, have you seen this?" He slid the tablet across the desk. Eleanor watched Bella's video. She read the Post article. She didn't flinch. She simply took a sip of her Earl Grey tea. "He's desperate," Eleanor said calmly. "He's effective," Julian countered. "The board is blowing up my phone. 3 members want to know if you have a clean bill of health. If they think you're incompetent, they can invoke the 25th Amendment of the corporate bylaws and remove you as interim CEO." "They want to fight." Eleanor stood up, walking to the window. "Alexander thinks he can gaslight the world like he gaslighted me. Eleanor, we need a statement. We need to deny this." "No," she turned. "If I deny it, I look defensive. If I attack Bella, I look petty. Then what do we do?" "We ignore the circus," Eleanor said, her eyes cold. and we look at the clowns. Alexander is spending money he doesn't have on this PR campaign. Marcus Stone charges $50,000 a day. Where is the money coming from, Julian? I don't know. His accounts are frozen. Exactly. Eleanor smiled, though it wasn't a happy smile. He's accessing a rainy day fund, a hidden account. If we find that account, we find the proof of his embezzlement. Let him play his games on TikTok. I'm going to bury him with a spreadsheet. But Eleanor underestimated just how low Alexander was willing to go. 3 days later, Eleanor received a summons. It wasn't for a board meeting. It was for family court. Alexander had filed an emergency motion for an order of protection and a request for a court-appointed psychological evaluation of Eleanor, citing her erratic and dangerous behavior. To make matters worse, he had a witness. The courtroom in Lower Manhattan was packed with reporters. The Billionaire brawl had become the obsession of the tabloids. Alexander arrived in a dark suit, looking gaunt and sympathetic, holding Bella's hand. He played the role of the battered husband perfectly. Eleanor walked in alone, flanked only by her attorney, a sharp-edged woman named Patricia Vance, her cousin. The proceedings were brutal. Alexander's lawyer painted a picture of Eleanor as a recluse, a woman who spoke to her plants, who hoarded old newspapers, a lie, and who had threatened suicide to keep Alexander from leaving, a monstrous lie. "Your Honor," Alexander's lawyer boomed, "we are not asking for money. We are asking for safety. Mr. Sterling is concerned that Mrs. Sterling's sudden, hostile takeover of the company is a symptom of a deep-seated pathology. He is worried she will burn the company to the ground." "Objection!" Patricia shouted. "This is speculation." "I have a witness," the lawyer said smugly. "I call Leo Sterling to the stand." Eleanor froze. Leo, her eldest son, 21 years old. He was supposed to be at Yale. The doors opened, and Leo walked in. He looked like a younger version of Alexander. Tall, dark hair, weak chin. He wouldn't look at his mother. Eleanor felt a crack in her heart that no business deal could fix. She had protected Leo from his father's neglect for years. She had sat with him through his asthma attacks, proofread his college essays, covered for him when he crashed his first car. Leo took the stand. "Leo," Alexander's lawyer asked gently, "tell the court about your mother's behavior recently." Leo shifted in his seat. He looked at his father, who gave him a subtle, encouraging nod. Mum has been intense lately," Leo mumbled into the microphone. "She's been paranoid. She stays up all night going through Dad's papers. She told me Dad was a criminal, but she never showed me proof. She just seemed obsessed. Did you feel unsafe?" I guess. It felt like she was on a warpath. She wasn't acting like herself." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Eleanor stared at her son. She didn't see a villain. She saw a boy who had been bought. Alexander had likely promised him a VP position, a trust fund release, or a new sports car. Alexander knew Leo's weakness. He was desperate for his father's approval, something Alexander had withheld for 20 years, just so he could use it as currency now. The judge looked at Eleanor with concern. "Mrs. Sterling, these are serious allegations. If you are acting out of a manic state, I cannot allow you to remain in control of a Fortune 500 company." Eleanor stood up. Her lawyer tried to pull her down, but she shook her off. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly beneath the table. "My son is confused. He mistakes obsession for due diligence, and he mistakes paranoia for forensic accounting." "Mrs. Sterling, sit down," the judge warned. "No," Eleanor said. "My husband claims I am crazy because I am looking at the books. He claims I am unstable because I found the holes in his stories. If being thorough is a mental illness, then yes, commit me. But until then, ask yourself, why is my husband so terrified of me reading the company ledger? The judge ordered a recess and a psychological evaluation to be conducted within the week. It was a partial victory for Alexander. It stalled Eleanor. It cast doubt on her leadership. In the hallway outside, Eleanor cornered Leo. "Leo," she said, her voice breaking. Leo stopped, looking guilty. "Mum, look, Dad said if I did this, he'd put me in charge of the European division. He said you were going to sell the company and leave us with nothing." "And you believed him?" Eleanor asked softly. "You believed the man who missed your high school graduation to go to a conference in Vegas with his mistress?" Leo looked down. "He's Dad. He's powerful. You're just Mom." That stung more than the lies. "You're just Mom." "Go back to Yale, Leo," Eleanor said, turning away. "Before you watch your father go to prison. I don't want you to see that." "Prison?" Leo laughed nervously. "Come on, Mum. It's a civil suit." "It was," Eleanor whispered to herself as Leo walked away. "It was." She took out her phone and dialed Julian. "Julian, the kid is compromised. We're on our own. Tell me you found something on the Bolivia deal." "I found something better," Julian's voice came through, crackling with excitement. "I found the shell company. It's not in Bolivia. It's in the Cayman Islands. And Eleanor, Alexander isn't just losing money. He's paying someone." "Paying who?" "I don't know yet. But the payments are massive. $5 million a month to an entity called Blue Heron. And get this, Blue Heron doesn't import lithium. It imports nothing." "He's being blackmailed," Eleanor realized. "Or," Julian said darkly, "he's funding something illegal. We need access to the server farm in New Jersey. The physical backups. If we can get the metadata from those transfers, we have him." "Meet me there in 2 hours," Eleanor said. "Bring a crowbar." The Sterling Vance data center was a fortress in the industrial wastelands of New Jersey. It was a windowless grey box surrounded by razor wire. Eleanor didn't bring a crowbar. She brought the master key card, an override pass her father had given her 20 years ago. "In case the computers try to lock us out of our own legacy," he had joked. She prayed the encryption codes hadn't been changed. She met Julian in the parking lot. It was raining, a torrential downpour that matched the chaotic state of her life. Julian was wearing a hoodie, looking less like a billionaire investor and more like a hacker. "The night shift security guard is paid off," Julian said. "He thinks we're doing a surprise audit. We have 30 minutes before the automated system logs a security breach." They entered the server room. The hum of cooling fans was deafening. Rows of black monoliths blinked with blue and green lights, holding the digital lifeblood of the logistics empire. "Station 4, Julian pointed. "That's where the off-book transaction logs are mirrored. Alexander thinks deleting them from the cloud deletes them forever. He forgets about the hard redundancy." Eleanor sat at the terminal. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She wasn't just a gardener. She was a Vance. She knew the filing system code because she had helped invent it in the late 90s. Access denied. "He changed the password," Eleanor cursed. "Try his birthday," Julian suggested. "Too obvious." "Bella's birthday. He doesn't know it," Eleanor scoffed. She thought for a moment. What was the one thing Alexander loved more than money? More than women? Himself. She typed. "The King Alex. Access denied." She tried. "Billionaire. Access denied." 5 minutes, Eleanor," Julian hissed, watching the door. Eleanor closed her eyes. She thought about the man she married, the man who was insecure, who needed constant validation, who needed to feel superior. She typed, Eleanor Iswick. Access granted. Eleanor stared at the screen. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Of course, even his passwords are about me. She opened the file directory for Project Bolivia. The screen filled with shipping manifests. Thousands of them. Look at this, Eleanor pointed. These ships, the SS Siren, the SS Vulture, they are listed as carrying lithium batteries from South America to Singapore. So, Julian asked. So look at the weight distribution. She tapped the screen. Lithium is heavy. These containers are registered as empty. He's shipping air. No, Eleanor scrolled down. He's shipping people. Julian froze. What? Look at the provisions list for the containers. Water, MREs, sanitation kits, ventilation modifications. Eleanor's face went white. It's not a mining operation, Julian. It's human trafficking. He's using the logistics network to smuggle undocumented workers, or worse, through the Pacific Corridor. Oh my God, Julian whispered. Blue Heron. It's a coyote ring. It's worse. Eleanor clicked on a financial subfolder. He's not running it. He's paying them. He's paying a cartel for protection because... Oh, Alexander, you idiot. She opened a scanned document. It was a photo of Alexander, younger, shaking hands with a man who looked very dangerous. The document was a loan agreement. He borrowed money from the cartel to start the company in 2003, Eleanor realized, the horror dawning on her. My father didn't fully fund the merger. Alexander was short. He borrowed from loan sharks to match my father's buy-in, so he wouldn't look poor. And now they own him. The Bolivia mine is just him paying back the interest by moving their cargo for free. The magnitude of the situation hit them. This wasn't embezzlement. This was international organized crime. If this came out, Sterling Vance Dynamics wouldn't just go bankrupt. It would be seized by the DOJ. The family name would be destroyed. We have to go to the FBI, Julian said. If we go to the FBI, the company dies. The stock goes to zero. My father's legacy is dust, Eleanor said. Eleanor, you can't cover this up. I'm not going to cover it up, she said, pulling a flash drive from her pocket and plugging it in. I'm going to leverage it. You're going to blackmail the cartel? Julian looked at her like she was insane. No, I'm going to blackmail Alexander. If he doesn't want to spend the rest of his life in a federal supermax avoiding shanks, he's going to do exactly what I say. Clang. The sound of a heavy metal door slamming shut echoed through the server room. Eleanor and Julian spun around. Standing at the end of the aisle wasn't the security guard. It was Alexander, and he wasn't alone. Behind him stood two men who definitely were not lawyers. They wore leather jackets and looked like they broke fingers for a living. I knew you'd come here, Alexander said, his voice echoing over the hum of the servers. He looked terrible, unshaven, manic, his eyes wild. You just couldn't leave it alone, could you, Ellie? You had to dig. Alexander, Eleanor said, standing in front of the terminal, shielding the flash drive. This is over. We know about Blue Heron. It's not over, Alexander sneered. It's just being restructured. He nodded to the men. Grab the drive and grab her. We're going for a boat ride. Alex, what are you doing? Julian stepped forward. These men are my business partners, Alexander said, and they don't like auditors. One of the thugs pulled a gun. Eleanor realized then that the boardroom rules no longer applied. She wasn't fighting for her company anymore. She was fighting for her life. Run! Eleanor screamed, shoving Julian toward the emergency exit. The barrel of the gun was matte black, steady in the hand of the man Alexander had called a business partner. The hum of the servers seemed to drop an octave, the air in the room growing heavy and electric. "Run!" Eleanor had screamed, but Julian had stumbled. He wasn't an action hero. He was a venture capitalist. He tripped over a loose bundle of Cat5 cables, sprawling onto the metal grating of the floor. Alexander stepped forward, his shoes clicking ominously. "Don't be dramatic, Eleanor. Nobody needs to get hurt. Just give me the drive. We'll wipe the servers and you two can walk away. You can have the house in Connecticut. I just want the company." "You don't want the company, Alex," Eleanor said, her voice shaking, but her grip on the flash drive iron tight. "You need the company to launder their money. Without it, you're dead. If I give you this drive, you have no reason to keep us alive." The gunman, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, stepped closer. "Time is money, Mr. Sterling. Get the drive, or I take it." Eleanor backed up until her heels hit the main console of the server bank. Her hand hovered over the keyboard behind her back. "You think I came here alone?" Eleanor bluffed. "The FBI is 10 minutes out." "You're lying," Alexander laughed, though his eyes darted nervously to the exit. "You wouldn't call the feds. It would tank the stock price. You care too much about your precious legacy." "I care about justice," Eleanor said. "Grab her," the gunman ordered his partner. As the second thug lunged, Eleanor didn't run. She slammed her hand down on the keyboard, hitting a specific key sequence she had queued up moments before. Command executed. System purge. Fire suppression initiated. In a high-security data center, fire is the enemy. Water destroys electronics, so these rooms use gas suppression systems. In the old days it was halon. Now it was a clean agent gas designed to displace oxygen rapidly to starve a fire. A deafening siren shrieked. Amber lights strobed, plunging the room into chaotic, flashing shadows. A hiss like a jet engine erupted from the ceiling nozzles as the gas flooded the room. "What did you do?" Alexander screamed, covering his ears. "Get out! The oxygen levels are dropping!" The gunman shouted, panic breaking his cool facade. He lowered the gun, coughing. "Julian, move!" Eleanor grabbed Julian by the collar of his hoodie, hauling him up. The confusion was their weapon. The swirling gas created a thick fog. Eleanor knew the layout. She had helped design the floor plan. Alexander and the thugs were stumbling, blinded by the strobes and the gas. Eleanor dragged Julian not toward the main exit, but toward a maintenance hatch in the floor, the crawl space used for cable routing. She kicked the latch open. "Down!" she hissed. They dropped into the cramped, dusty darkness beneath the floorboards, just as the heavy steel blast doors of the server room began to automatically seal shut to contain the fire. Above them, they heard shouting. "The door! Hold the door!" Alexander's voice cracked. Then a heavy thud, then silence, save for the mechanical whir of the ventilation system. Did we just kill them?" Julian whispered, coughing in the dark. "No," Eleanor whispered back, pulling out her phone. The screen cast a ghostly blue light on her face. "The gas is non-lethal to humans in short bursts, but it disorients you. The doors are magnetic. They are locked in there for at least 15 minutes until the fire department resets the system." "So we have 15 minutes to run?" "No," Eleanor said, swiping on her screen. "We have 15 minutes to broadcast." "Broadcast?" Eleanor turned the phone screen toward Julian. It showed a progress bar. "Upload complete." "I didn't just copy the files, Julian. I set up a mirrored stream to the cloud. And 10 seconds ago, when I hit that key, I sent a link to the entire board of directors, the SEC Enforcement Division, and the personal email of the District Attorney of the Southern District of New York." Julian stared at her, wide-eyed. "You nuked it. You really nuked the company." "I cauterized the wound," Eleanor corrected. The infection was Alexander. The company will survive. But him? She looked up at the floorboards above them, where muffled pounding could be heard. He's done. The scene outside the data center, 20 minutes later, was a tableau of chaos. Fire trucks, sirens wailing, had blockaded the entrance. State troopers were swarming the perimeter. When the fire captain overrode the system and opened the server room doors, he didn't find a fire. He found the CEO of Sterling Vance Dynamics and 2 known cartel enforcers gasping for air, trapped like rats in a cage. The police found the gun on the floor. They found the open laptop with the illegal shipping manifests still on the screen. Eleanor and Julian emerged from the side exit, dusty and tired, into the waiting arms of the law, not as suspects, but as witnesses. As Alexander was led out in handcuffs, his expensive suit ruined, he saw Eleanor standing by a police cruiser. A blanket was draped over her shoulders. She looked regal, untouched by the grime. He lunged toward her, restrained by 2 officers. Ellie, tell them! Tell them it was a mistake! I can fix this! I have money!" Eleanor walked over to him. She didn't look angry. She looked at him with the detachment of a scientist examining a specimen. "You don't have money, Alexander," she said softly. "The Cayman accounts have been frozen. The trust has been locked." "And Bella?" Alexander blinked, desperate hope in his eyes. "Bella will help me. She loves me." Eleanor sighed. "I checked my phone. Bella just posted a statement. She claims she was a victim of your coercive control and had no idea about your criminal activities. She's already negotiating an interview with Good Morning America." Alexander's knees buckled. The reality of his absolute solitude crashed down on him. "Why?" he wept. "I made you rich." "I was already rich," Eleanor whispered. "You just made me lonely. Goodbye, Alexander." She turned her back on him as the police car door slammed shut. The boardroom of Sterling Vance Dynamics had been remodeled. The dark mahogany and heavy leather chairs, relics of the boys' club era, were gone. The room was now airy, filled with light oak, glass, and modern art. The view of Manhattan was the same, but the atmosphere was entirely different. Eleanor Sterling sat at the head of the table. She wore a suit of navy blue, sharp and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor addressed the shareholders and the board, "the transition has been painful. I will not sugarcoat it. The stock took a 40% hit following the indictment of the former CEO. There were murmurs around the table. "However," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength, "transparency has value. By self-reporting the irregularities in the South American logistics chain and cooperating fully with the DOJ, we avoided criminal prosecution as an entity. We paid the fines. We purged the leadership involved." She pressed a button, and a graph appeared on the screen. It showed a sharp red line going down, followed by a slow, steady green line climbing back up. "And thanks to the capitalization from Helios, thank you, Julian, we have pivoted. We are no longer shipping anything anywhere. We are now the leaders in secure, ethical supply chain management. We vet every container. Our clients trust us because we have nothing to hide. As of this morning, Sterling Vance stock has recovered to pre-scandal levels." Applause broke out. It was genuine this time. Julian Hayes sat to her right, beaming. He wasn't just an investor anymore. He was the COO. After the meeting adjourned, Eleanor remained in the conference room. She had one last appointment. The door opened, and Leo walked in. Her son looked older. The arrogance he had worn in the courtroom 6 months ago was gone, replaced by a humble, almost frightened demeanor. He was wearing a waiter's uniform from a bistro down the street. "Mum," Leo said, standing awkwardly by the door. Leo, Eleanor gestured to a chair. Sit. Leo sat. I saw the news. About Dad's sentencing. 20 years, Eleanor said flatly. RICO charges, human trafficking, conspiracy. I know. Leo looked at his hands. I went to see him, in holding. And? He asked me for money for the commissary. He blamed you. He blamed the lawyers. He blamed everyone but himself. Leo looked up, tears in his eyes. I realized you were right. About everything. Eleanor looked at her son. She wanted to hug him, but she knew that to save him, she had to be strong first. You lied in court, Leo. You tried to have me committed. I know, I'm sorry. He promised me the world. He promised you things he didn't own, Eleanor said. You've been cut off from the trust for 6 months. How has it been? Hard, Leo admitted. I'm waiting tables. I share an apartment with 3 guys in Queens. I take the subway. Good, Eleanor said. Leo looked surprised. Good. You needed to learn the value of $1 that wasn't given to you. Eleanor slid a folder across the table. Leo opened it. It was an employment contract. Entry-level logistics coordinator, Leo read. The warehouse in Newark? Shift starts at 5 a.m. You wear a vest. You check manifests. You work your way up. No special treatment. If you're late, you're fired. If you use the name Sterling to get a favor, you're fired. Eleanor leaned forward. This company is your legacy, Leo. But it is not your birthright. You have to earn it. Do you want the job? Leo looked at the contract. He looked at the salary. It was meager compared to his old allowance. Then he looked at his mother, really seeing her strength for the first time. Yes, Leo said, picking up a pen. I want the job. Good, Eleanor smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Welcome to Sterling Vance. Later that evening, Eleanor and Julian sat on the terrace of a restaurant in Tribeca. The air was cool, the wine was expensive. You went easy on the kid, Julian noted. He's my son. He was poisoned by his father. He deserves a chance to sweat it out, Eleanor said. So it's really over. Julian clinked his glass against hers. Alexander is in prison. Where is Bella? Last I heard, she's on a reality show about reformed gold diggers. She's selling tummy tea on Instagram. Eleanor chuckled. And you? Julian looked at her admiringly. You saved the empire. I did. Eleanor took a sip of wine. Her expression turned thoughtful. You know, Julian, there is one thing I never told you. About the server room. What? When I typed in the password, the override code. Yeah? Eleanor is weak. Pretty nasty password. No. Eleanor shook her head. That wasn't the password. Julian frowned. But I saw you type it. I typed it, Eleanor admitted. But it didn't work. The screen said access denied. Julian froze. Wait, if the password didn't work, how did you get the files? How did you trigger the fire alarm? Eleanor smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile that reminded Julian exactly who he was dealing with. I didn't need his password, Julian. The system recognized my biometrics. My father built a back door into the mainframe 30 years ago. A God mode that overrides everything, even the CEO. He gave it to me on his deathbed. He told me, Alexander is ambitious, but he has no moral compass. If he ever strays, you pull the plug. She twirled the stem of her wine glass. I had access to those files for 5 years, Julian. I saw the Cayman transfers start in 2019. I saw the shipping manifests. Julian stared at her, the blood draining from his face. You knew? For 5 years. Why didn't you stop him? Because 5 years ago, if I divorced him, he would have gotten half. Eleanor said coolly. The prenup had a sunset clause. If we stayed married for 20 years, the assets split 50-50 regardless of fault. But if he committed a felony using company resources, the forfeiture clause kicks in. So you let him do it, Julian whispered. You let him traffic people? To save your money? I monitored it, Eleanor corrected, her voice hard. I anonymously tipped off the Coast Guard 3 times to intercept the worst shipments. I made sure no one died. But I needed him to dig the hole deep enough so that when I pushed him in, he wouldn't be able to climb out. I needed him to be so arrogant, so sloppy, that he would introduce a mistress as his future wife and hand me the murder weapon. She finished her wine. It wasn't about the money, Julian. It was about the company. My father's company. Alexander was a cancer. You don't treat cancer with an aspirin. You cut it out. I just waited until the tumor was big enough to be operable. Julian looked at her. He saw the elegance, the beauty, and the terrifying, cold calculation underneath. He realized that Alexander Sterling was never the shark. He was just the bait. Remind me, Julian said, loosening his tie. Never to cross you, Eleanor. Don't worry, Julian. Eleanor patted his hand gently. As long as you sign the papers on time, we'll get along just fine. She signaled the waiter. Check, please. And that is the story of Eleanor Sterling. In the end, Alexander thought he was the player, but he was just a pawn in a game Eleanor had been mastering for years. It makes you wonder, how much do we really know about the quiet people in the room? Alexander mistook silence for weakness and patience for submission. He paid for that mistake with his freedom. Eleanor walked away with the empire, the money, and her dignity. Was she ruthless? Absolutely. Did she cross a line by waiting to strike? Maybe. But in the world of billionaires, perhaps the only difference between a hero and a villain is who is left standing to tell the story. What do you guys think? Was Eleanor a genius for waiting for the perfect trap? Or was she wrong for letting Alexander continue his crimes just to secure her inheritance? I want to see your debates in the comments below. Team Eleanor or Team? Well, is anyone Team Alexander? I doubt it. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, revenge, and corporate warfare, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. I've got a crazy one coming up next week about a lottery winner and a fake identity. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.